How is it going, you guys? We are back here in my humble kitchen to talk to you a bit about school. So for those of you guys that have been in touch with me and talked to me on Discord, some of you might have noticed that not too long ago, I was a student in university. I faced quite a bit of interesting states when it comes to my grades. At the start, as well as in high school, I had pretty great grades, but as I became disillusioned and less interested in my topics in school, I found that my grades started to slip, and in general, I started to get much worse grades as things were going on. This got so bad that I decided to kind of take a break from school. I thought maybe programming wasn't for me, or exactly the program that I was in, but eventually I ended up coming back to university, and that little break there gave me an opportunity to reflect and kind of rethink my approach to university, and I came back at it with a much different view and a lot of different strategies for going to university, learning, and getting the most out of my grades. So in this video, I want to talk about the changes that I made and what took me from those nearly failing, in some cases actually failing grades, to acing a lot of the courses I was taking at university. Now, before we get too far into this video, I should preface that I have ADHD and dyslexia, and so a lot of these strategies were kind of built around that. I think pretty much anyone can learn from these. A lot of the people that I've actually talked to about this and had them give some of this a try have gotten really far with it. So I really figure I should make this video, and I think I should make it available for everybody else to kind of learn from, and also learn from some of the things that I originally didn't do and mistakes that I made earlier on that I reflected on and helped me change my grades and my approach to learning. So let's go ahead and get into the first thing that I changed. And this was probably the most impactful of all of my changes, and that is surrounding myself in my course content. And so what do I mean by surrounding myself in it? Well, what I mean is trying to give myself as much exposure to the topic that I'm working on in a course, or maybe that semester, or even just in school in general, if there isn't anything particular in mind that I need to work on. And the big reason for this is getting multiple exposure to the same ideas. There's been lots of studies that have shown that while exposure the first time to something can help, you get a lot more use out of the second exposure. So if you can expose yourself to, say, a new term that you're going to learn in university before you even learned it in school, you're going to have a much better time actually learning it the second time. Even if you never got it the first time, even if you have no idea what they were talking about in the first place, you'll be able to get a lot more context clues and understand it and define that word in your head a lot better. And as far as those studies, I'll link one of those down in the description for those of you guys interested. Now, how exactly would you go about doing this? Well, there's a few different ways. One of the ways that I did it was getting into podcasts. So for example, in my algorithms class, I listened to a lot of algorithms related podcasts. For my C++ and advanced memory management performance sort of course that I took, I got into a C++ podcast that I started listening to. There's a ton of different podcasts. There's a podcast on basically everything these days. And if you guys are needing to work on learning something, you need to become familiar with the terminology, which I find personally to be very difficult, and even getting like an intuition of things, then I highly recommend the podcast route, because you can just listen to a podcast on your way to university, or maybe when you're commuting between classes, and you get a little bit of learning in without really having to think about it too much. And I find that a lot of the time, this made a huge impact on just being able to have an intuition for different things in school. And it's also really great for just general learning. You can pick up a lot of stuff that you won't learn in class just by listening to a lot of these podcasts. Obviously, it helps to go for the more, focused podcasts, maybe a bit less of just like, random humor sort of stuff. Obviously trying to go for something a bit more focused on your class content. But at the same time, do try to find a podcast that you enjoy listening to, because the more you enjoy it, the more you'll actually listen to it. So don't feel like you need to be listening to, somebody reading from a textbook for hours. Another way to surround yourself with the topic is getting involved with people that are actually interested in it. So if there's a club related to it at your university, maybe try to sit in on those clubs' activities. Maybe try to get to know some people that are interested in it. So that way you have them to maybe bounce some ideas off of. Just chat about the topic to try and kind of get yourself more familiar with it, or even going on forums. So for example, going onto something like Discord, or maybe there's a subreddit specific to the topic that you're learning about, any of those to be able to ask questions, as well as looking at things and trying to answer questions. There's a lot of power in also answering questions. Obviously, this is not specific to what I was saying before when it comes to learning the terminology, but sometimes the best way to learn something is to practice teaching it, because it kind of opens up these holes in your knowledge where maybe you don't know the whole answer, and you can start answering something and somebody could reply to your own answer correcting something, and you could learn something in the process. In addition to that, if you guys are doing programming, obviously be sure to check out Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow stuff. Obviously that's super helpful. Whatever it takes for you to get involved in the topic. There is a ton that you can learn and a ton that you can get away from these people, as well as that they can learn from you. Even if you're not the most familiar with the topic, there's a lot of things that this crossover is going to expose you to that maybe they're not exposed to, and then it kind of helps everybody learn in the process. Surrounding yourself in what you're learning, I find to be extremely important and is one of the most important points from today. One thing that really helps me do this is our sponsor for today's video, Brilliant. Brilliant is an online learning platform that I find to be especially powerful when it comes to applying this key concept that we talked about before of surrounding yourself in learning, because it allows you to pick up and play and learn new concepts day to day with the daily habits and learning new skills every single day. I find it to be a very efficient way to learn. In fact, I find it to be one of the more efficient ways to learn from what I've been using it for, which is day to day, using it on the bus, picking up and continuing from where I left off, kind of similar to how we talked about using podcasts. Since Brilliant gives you the opportunity to problem solve and apply your skills as you learn, I find it to be a bit more engaging than podcasts, and especially helpful if you guys are, say, for example, taking the bus, or maybe you've just got a spare few minutes during the day. If you guys are new to university or just programming in general, then I would highly recommend having a look at the excellent course, Programming in Python. It can be used as both a great refresher or a really good introduction to the programming language Python, and a really good opportunity for you to do what we were talking about before and kind of work through some problems throughout the day. Thanks again to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, be sure to check out brilliant.org/GavinFreeborn or click on the link in the description below. You'll also get 20% off Brilliant's premium annual subscription. All right, and next up, this is probably something that I think a lot of you guys are familiar with, so I try not to spend too much time with it, but that is trying to gamify things for yourself. So for me, I try to do a lot of bullet point lists. I don't really do the more extreme versions of gamification where people write like side quests and stuff for, I guess, their schooling and everything, or having my own like point system. I just kind of keep a running to-do list and kind of think about those kind of in a similar way to points and trying to kind of knock out to-do lists. A big thing with this is I try to take advantage of it by actually looking at a project and breaking them down into to-do points. This has a few different pros to it. The pro obviously is the general gamification. It gets you a bit more interested in it, but also if you break it down into points and bulleted lists, it gets you started on a project without actually having to do any work yet. And usually once you've started a project, it's a lot easier to actually finish it and keep working on it. It's way easier continuing on a project than it is to start from scratch. In addition, I tried to have some sort of a streak or a running tally. So usually if I was working on a group project or a project in general, I would try to be active on GitHub and kind of keep a constant streak going where I was working on things throughout the day. And GitHub gives you like a nice little interface to be able to see each of those little green blocks for each month that you've been working and each day you've been working. And finally, for gamification, I think a big thing that really helps is trying to be competitive. I myself am a very competitive guy, just due to doing sports when I was younger. And I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate on being competitive. So what I try to do is apply this in group projects. If I maybe am doing a group project that involves a lot of coding, then I'll try to have like the most commits in that group project. Obviously, don't hold back your own group project just for this. But in addition, I also would try to maybe be competitive with classmate. So for example, I would have like a mini hackathon with a friend to work on an assignment together. And we'll see how much work we can get done in a certain amount of time. My next tip that I recommend is trying to tie your interests into your work. For example, if you're taking a class where maybe you're not interested in what you're writing about a lot, something that I found really helped was I tried to get myself interested in law tech, and it kind of made the process of making these diagrams and writing all this documentation and stuff a bit more interesting for me personally. Another one would be in my database class. We had a lot of assignments where we had to implement databases or database features. And one of the things that we did in that was using Python. And so to try and like practice some ideas that I've been working on my own, I tried to do things in a more functional style because I was getting into functional programming at the time. And you guys can kind of apply this yourselves. You can try and like tackle a project in a different way than how you normally would to try and challenge yourself and make it a bit more interesting. I found that as a result, I ended up spending more time on the projects just because I was having more fun with them. And I would often end up finishing early just because trying to challenge yourself can often make you think of things in a different way that you would have expected, or maybe you would come up with a better way to format everything in case of a document. There's a lot of different ways that you can get an advantage out of this. Obviously, don't let your interests sidetrack you too much. Now, the next one, I think we've all heard this one before, but I cannot stress it enough. Time management is huge in university, especially for those of you guys working a job. Maybe you have a side project, anything like that. Time management is a massive portion of what you should be focusing on. So for me, at the very start of a semester, I tried to map out as much as I could. When I get the course curriculum, I put all my tests, when I'm going to study with them, and how early I need to be reminded of them in my calendar ahead of time. I used Google Calendar for a lot of it, as well as org mode. Org mode has like an agenda feature. I won't really go into that, but the main idea is use some sort of a calendar application to do a few things. Mark the days that you have tests, mark the days that you have assignments due, and mark when you're going to start studying for that test. So for me, I try to do like 1 week of studying for every midterm or test or whatever I have coming up. 1 week gives you enough time to refresh. And if you need more time, obviously that's totally necessary, especially for finals. You need to give yourself extra time, especially for projects. A big thing for me is that I would time block. So I would put a little block in my calendar where I would focus on, like, from this time to this time, I'm going to study or work on this project. I don't need to finish it. I just need to do something related to it for that period of time. And that's all I need. And I wouldn't try and make these time blocks like massive, because that way I would, break down, spend time on different projects throughout the semester and not really, get too stuck into the weeds of one thing for the entire day and then have some other project or assignment or test that's coming up where I would miss out. Same thing with studying. Time block for studying. Make sure that you make time for studying. It is massive. And finally, this is something that is really near and dear to me, and it kind of changed my life, honestly, was having something outside of school to do that isn't maybe going to take up all your time. Like, something that I had a really bad habit of was getting into a video game and having that video game take up a lot of my school time. But for me, I started getting a lot more active. I started pursuing sports a lot more. And as a result, I became healthier, obviously. And I can't really pursue sports 24/7. I'm not going to run for 2 days straight, but I could play video games for 2 days straight if I really wanted to. So try to find a hobby where, while you can spend a lot of time on it, it's not going to be the thing that can soak up all your time. You can't run forever. You can't, lift weights forever. And so it gives you a little chance to get away from school, separate things out. But then when you go back to school, it's still your focus. It kind of breaks things up. You never feel like you're just only focusing on school. Obviously, there comes times where you have to sacrifice your time on your side project or your thing that could be taking up some time, which does suck. I tried my best to, schedule time so I never have to deal with that. But sometimes it comes up and it is what it is. And yeah, that is the big set of changes that I made. The first one, the idea of surrounding yourself in topics, honestly, is probably the biggest one. I highly recommend it. I recommend all of you guys try and give this a go, especially if you can find a podcast that interests you, that's related to what you're working on at school, and gives you kind of an interesting point of view. You might find yourself listening to it after the time you finish your class. I know recently, when I was all done my schooling and university, I ended up having so many different random podcasts that I was listening to that I had to eventually give it a break. Same thing with getting involved on Discord. Sometimes I think Discord might be a bit of a rabbit hole. You could end up putting yourself in a bad spot if you, end up looking in the wrong places, where you end up, soaking up a lot of time where you're not really learning. But the more important Discords where I actually learned a lot, I still am in and find myself learning every single day. And I try to leave the ones where I didn't learn anything from them. But it's kind of sometimes hard. Sometimes you just get interested and chat with people and, feel a bit dorky doing it sometimes. Maybe you don't. I don't know. I do sometimes. And before I go, I wanted to give a big shout out to my supporters on Patreon, as well as GitHub sponsors. I really appreciate all that you guys have done for the channel. It's made a huge impact on me being able to make these videos and financially support the time I'm putting into it, as well as keeping the content coming. And I think it's made a pretty big impact, not just on myself, but the people watching this, because thanks to you, I've been able to keep going and keep making these videos. And yeah, that concludes today's video. Thank you guys so much for sticking through it. If you have any feedback for me, be sure to let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you guys, and I'll be down there reading and trying to respond to every single one that I can. All right. Okay. I'll see you next time.